the Alpha King married his Omega for revenge, until he realized he truly loved her. What could drive a king to build a marriage on revenge instead of trust? And what could possibly change a heart that made such a choice in the first place? If you enjoy unforgettable stories of love, destiny, and redemption, subscribe and turn on notifications for more. Do you believe a marriage that begins with revenge can ever become real love? Now, let us step inside a kingdom where every promise carries hidden weight and where the truth behind one royal marriage is only beginning to unfold. The cruelest vows are not spoken with hatred, but with a heart that refuses to feel. The great cathedral of Mooncrest Citadel shimmered beneath streams of golden morning light pouring through towering stained glass windows, filling the vast hall with colors that danced across polished marble floors. Noble families, royal advisors, village elders, and honored guests stood in perfect silence as the bronze bells echoed throughout the kingdom, announcing the beginning of the most anticipated royal wedding in generations. Yet there was no joy resting upon the face of Alpha King Adrian Carter. Dressed in an elegant black royal cloak embroidered with silver, he stood before the ancient altar with the calm, unreadable expression of a man fulfilling an obligation rather than celebrating a promise. His steel-blue eyes never searched the entrance for the woman he was about to marry. Instead, they remained fixed upon the distant stained glass, as though the ceremony itself meant nothing more than another duty expected of a king. Then the enormous oak doors slowly opened. Clara Bennett stepped inside alone. The young white-skinned Omega wore a simple ivory gown without extravagant jewels or elaborate embroidery. A charcoal gray cloak rested gently across her shoulders, and fresh, white roses were woven into her chestnut brown hair. She walked gracefully through the center aisle while whispers quietly spread among the gathered guests. Some pitied her. Others questioned why an Omega would accept a marriage so visibly lacking in affection. A few simply lowered their eyes, unwilling to witness a bride whose smile carried quiet courage instead of excitement. Clara noticed every expression, yet her gentle blue eyes remained peaceful. She neither hurried nor hesitated. Each measured step reflected remarkable dignity, as though she had accepted the weight of this moment long before anyone else understood it. When she finally reached the altar, Adrian acknowledged her with only a brief glance before returning his attention to the officiant. The distance between them felt greater than the width of the cathedral itself. As sacred vows echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling, Adrian repeated every word with flawless composure, but his voice remained emotionally distant, careful, restrained, almost mechanical. Clara answered with quiet sincerity, her gentle voice carrying warmth that seemed strangely out of place beside the coldness standing opposite her. Those watching sensed that one heart had arrived prepared to honor a marriage, while the other had arrived determined only to complete it. Moments later, the ancient royal seal officially united the Alpha King and his Omega before the kingdom. Applause filled the cathedral, yet the sound felt hollow beneath the growing silence between the newly married couple. Outside, bright spring sunlight illuminated the castle gardens where thousands of blooming roses swayed beneath a gentle breeze, unaware that the marriage beginning within the palace walls had not been built upon love at all. As the royal procession returned toward Mooncrest Citadel, Clara quietly greeted every servant who bowed along the corridor, thanking them with the same kindness she had always shown. Adrian continued walking several steps ahead without looking back, his posture unwavering, his attention fixed entirely upon the responsibilities awaiting him inside the throne room. Standing near one of the towering marble columns, Captain Lucas Harper watched the scene unfold with quiet concern. Something about the young queen's peaceful smile did not match the loneliness reflected in her eyes whenever she believed no one was watching. Far above the palace, white doves circled through the clear blue sky while the bronze bells slowly faded into silence, marking not the joyful beginning of a royal love story, but the first quiet chapter of two hearts walking the same road for entirely different reasons. The first morning after the wedding arrived beneath a sky washed in pale gold, yet the warmth of sunrise never seemed to reach the royal chambers. Clara Bennett awoke before dawn, quietly folding the ceremonial gown she had worn only hours earlier before changing into her familiar ivory dress and charcoal gray cloak. The palace was still wrapped in silence as she slipped into the western gardens carrying a woven basket, greeting the elderly gardener with the same gentle smile she had offered long before becoming queen. Together they watered roses, gathered fresh herbs, and trimmed delicate branches touched by the cool night air. Clara listened patiently as the old man spoke about the approaching spring festival, remembering every small detail that mattered to the people serving the palace. By the time the first rays of sunlight illuminated Mooncrest Citadel, baskets filled with fresh flowers already decorated the infirmary, the royal library, and the palace dining hall. No one had asked her to do any of it. It simply felt natural to begin every day by making life a little brighter for someone else. Meanwhile, Adrian Carter stood inside the Royal Council chamber surrounded by ministers, maps, trade reports, and military updates. His voice remained calm and steady as he settled disputes between neighboring villages, approved grain shipments, and planned repairs to the kingdom's northern roads. Not once during the morning did he ask where his new queen had gone or whether she had settled comfortably into her new home. To Adrian, their marriage had fulfilled its purpose the moment the royal seal had been placed upon the marriage document. Everything afterward belonged to duty rather than affection. Shortly before noon, Clara personally carried fresh herbal tea into Adrian's private study after learning from an elderly servant that he often forgot to pause during long meetings. She placed the porcelain cup quietly beside his desk before preparing to leave without interrupting his work. Adrian finally looked up from a stack of official letters. "You do not need to bring these yourself," he said politely, though his voice remained distant. "The servants can handle such tasks." Clara offered a small nod. "I know they can, Your Majesty. I simply thought you might appreciate something warm after such a busy morning." Adrian acknowledged her with a brief glance before returning immediately to his documents. "Thank you." It was not an unkind response, yet it carried no invitation for conversation. Clara smiled gently anyway and quietly left the room, closing the heavy wooden door behind her without making a sound. Later that afternoon, palace servants noticed the royal dining table had been carefully prepared with Adrian's favorite bread, fresh herbs from the garden, and seasonal vegetables arranged with thoughtful simplicity. They also noticed only one chair had been occupied. Adrian had finished his meal alone after requesting that his schedule remain uninterrupted by unnecessary formalities. Clara ate later in the small palace kitchen alongside the cooks, laughing softly as they exchanged stories about the coming harvest. No bitterness appeared upon her face. She treated everyone around her with the same warmth she had always carried, refusing to allow another person's distance to change the kindness within her own heart. From an upper balcony overlooking the courtyard, Captain Lucas Harper watched the quiet rhythm unfolding below. The new queen greeted every servant by name, thanked each person for their work, and carried herself with remarkable grace despite the emotional distance surrounding her marriage. Adrian crossed the courtyard moments later on his way toward another council meeting. Clara looked up with a hopeful smile that lasted only a heartbeat before he passed by with a respectful nod and continued forward without slowing his pace. She never called after him. She simply watched until he disappeared beneath the stone archway, then turned back toward the gardens where another row of roses waited patiently for gentle hands willing to care for them. Days quietly blended into weeks, and the rhythm of life inside Mooncrest Citadel settled into an unusual pattern that few people fully understood. Every sunrise seemed to begin with Clara Bennett already awake, walking through the western gardens while morning mist still drifted between the rose bushes. She harvested fresh herbs for the palace physician, arranged flowers for the chapel, prepared baskets of vegetables for the royal kitchen, and greeted every servant she passed with genuine warmth. No task appeared too small for her attention because she believed that even the smallest kindness could become the brightest part of someone else's day. The palace slowly became more peaceful under her quiet care, although very few people realized who deserved the credit. Adrian Carter continued devoting every hour to governing the kingdom. Meetings with merchants, village leaders, scholars, and military officers filled his schedule from sunrise until long after sunset. Whenever he crossed paths with Clara, he remained respectful, but emotionally distant. He never raised his voice or treated her unfairly. Instead, he built an invisible wall between them, one that polite words could never overcome. Clara accepted that distance without complaint. She never asked why he had chosen such a cold marriage, nor did she expect his heart to change overnight. Instead, she quietly chose to become someone the kingdom could depend upon, even if the one person she wished would notice remained completely unaware. One rainy afternoon, a young palace servant accidentally dropped an entire tray of delicate porcelain dishes while rushing toward the dining hall. The sharp sound echoed through the corridor as several frightened servants stopped in alarm. The young woman immediately burst into tears, convinced she would lose her position inside the palace. Before anyone else could react, Clara gently knelt beside her, helping collect the broken pieces while reassuring her with a calm smile. She quietly spoke with the head steward, offering to replace the damaged dishes from her own personal allowance instead of allowing the frightened servant to bear the cost alone. The steward reluctantly agreed after seeing Clara's sincere determination. The grateful servant could barely speak through her tears. Clara simply placed a comforting hand upon her shoulder and reminded her that one mistake should never define an entire person. Later that evening, the palace physician discovered that fresh medicinal herbs had already been sorted and prepared before he arrived. The royal librarian found damaged historical books carefully repaired with remarkable patience. The kitchen staff received baskets of seasonal vegetables labeled with handwritten notes suggesting meals suitable for elderly servants recovering from illness. Even the royal stable master noticed fresh feed waiting for exhausted horses returning from long journeys. Everywhere throughout the palace, thoughtful acts quietly appeared as though guided by invisible hands. Captain Lucas Harper began noticing a pattern. Whenever a problem disappeared before becoming a crisis, Clara had somehow been nearby earlier that day. Curious but saying nothing, he started paying closer attention. Meanwhile, Adrian finished another exhausting council session before returning alone to his private study. A warm lantern already glowed beside the window. Fresh tea rested upon his desk, and the scattered reports he had left behind that morning had somehow been neatly organized into perfect order. Assuming a servant had completed the task, he continued working without another thought. Outside his window, Clara carefully watered the final row of roses beneath the fading evening light before quietly returning toward the palace. She paused only once, looking up at the illuminated study where Adrian remained surrounded by endless responsibilities. A gentle smile touched her face despite the silence between them. She whispered nothing, expected nothing, and slowly disappeared into the quiet corridors while, for the third consecutive week, the Alpha King unknowingly benefited from countless acts of love he never realized had surrounded him every single day. Several more weeks passed, and Mooncrest Citadel flourished beneath the quiet rhythm Clara Bennett had created without ever seeking recognition. Every corridor seemed brighter, every garden more vibrant, and every servant carried a little more confidence than before. The palace physician found fresh medicinal herbs prepared before each morning began. The royal librarian discovered damaged historical manuscripts carefully restored overnight. The kitchens never lacked seasonal vegetables, and the western gardens bloomed with remarkable beauty despite the changing weather. Most people simply believed the palace was enjoying an unusually fortunate season. Very few realized that countless small acts of devotion, repeated every single day, had become the invisible foundation supporting the entire royal household. Captain Lucas Harper could no longer dismiss what he had been observing. Every unexplained improvement somehow led back to Clara. One quiet afternoon, while inspecting the royal archives for old military records requested by the council, he noticed several worn journals resting upon a forgotten shelf. Curious, he opened one expecting financial reports or inventory lists. Instead, he found carefully organized notes written in elegant handwriting. The first pages described supplies quietly delivered to struggling villages before severe storms arrived. Later entries listed elderly servants who required warmer blankets during winter, recommendations for repairing dangerous staircases before accidents occurred, and reminders to prepare herbal remedies for children suffering seasonal illness. None of the entries carried requests for praise or acknowledgement. Each page focused entirely upon making someone else's tomorrow a little easier than today. Lucas slowly turned another page. Then another. The journal stretched back years, long before Clara had become queen. She had been quietly helping Mooncrest Kingdom without anyone realizing the full extent of her efforts. Even more surprising, many entries mentioned solutions completed anonymously so no one would feel indebted to her kindness. His expression gradually shifted from curiosity to quiet disbelief. That evening, Lucas visited the palace kitchen, carrying one of the journals beneath his arm. The elderly head cook smiled the moment she recognized the familiar handwriting. Miss Clara always left little notes beside new recipes, she recalled warmly. Whenever harvests were poor, she adjusted the meals so everyone still received proper nutrition. She spent hours studying herbs just to help us stretch every ingredient. Lucas thanked her before continuing toward the royal infirmary. The palace physician laughed softly after seeing the same journal. Half the herbal treatments we use today came from her careful observations, he explained. She never claimed to know more than anyone else. She simply listened, learned, and quietly recorded everything that might help another person someday. Everywhere Lucas went, another forgotten story surfaced. The librarian described evenings when Clara patiently repaired priceless books after everyone else had gone home. The stable master remembered arriving before sunrise only to find exhausted horses already fed and brushed. The elderly gardener smiled proudly while explaining that nearly every flower blooming across the palace grounds had been planted by Clara herself over many years. None of these people spoke with dramatic emotion. To them, her kindness had simply become part of everyday life. As twilight settled over Mooncrest Citadel, Lucas stood alone in the western gardens where rows of blooming white roses gently swayed beneath the evening breeze. Clara worked quietly nearby, trimming faded blossoms with the same peaceful smile she wore every day. She never looked toward the palace windows hoping someone might finally notice. She simply continued caring for the flowers one gentle touch at a time. Lucas suddenly realized something that left him completely still. The greatest mystery inside the kingdom was not why the palace had become stronger. The true mystery was how the Alpha King could have lived surrounded by so much quiet devotion without ever seeing the extraordinary woman standing only a few steps away. That evening, Captain Lucas Harper requested a private audience with Adrian Carter after the final council meeting had ended. The royal study remained illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns as maps, reports, and official correspondence covered the great oak desk. Adrian expected another discussion about border security or trade negotiations, but Lucas entered carrying several weathered journals, tied together with a simple linen ribbon. Without speaking immediately, he carefully placed them before the Alpha King. Adrian looked up with quiet curiosity. "What are these?" Lucas answered respectfully. "I believe they contain something Your Majesty deserves to see." Adrian untied the ribbon and opened the first journal. The elegant handwriting immediately caught his attention. Every page contained organized notes, observations, and reminders written with extraordinary care. There were lists of families needing extra food before difficult winters, records of repaired bridges completed before floods arrived, recommendations for improving palace working conditions, and detailed plans for supporting elderly servants whose health had quietly declined. Adrian slowly turned another page. Every entry focused entirely upon solving someone else's problem before it became a burden. None mentioned rewards, recognition, or gratitude. Lucas remained silent while the Alpha King continued reading. After several minutes, Adrian finally asked, "Who wrote all of this?" Lucas answered without hesitation, "Queen Clara." Silence settled heavily across the room. Adrian looked back at the pages, almost unwilling to believe what he had just heard. The journal stretched back years before their marriage. Every season contained another collection of thoughtful observations, practical solutions, and quiet acts of compassion carried out without anyone being asked to notice. Lucas then placed several folded letters beside the journals. I spent the afternoon speaking with the physician, the librarian, the gardeners, the kitchen staff, and the stable master, he explained. Each of them told nearly the same story. Whenever a problem disappeared before becoming serious, Queen Clara had already found a solution. She never requested recognition. She simply believed helping others was the right thing to do. Adrian lowered his eyes toward another page. A small sentence written near the bottom captured his attention. If one quiet kindness prevents tomorrow's sorrow, then today has already been worthwhile. He read the words again, slower this time. They did not sound like someone trying to earn admiration. They sounded like someone quietly living according to an unshakable belief. After Lucas departed, Adrian remained alone inside the study long after midnight. Instead of reviewing royal reports, he continued reading Clara's journals one page after another. He discovered careful records describing repairs completed anonymously throughout the palace, suggestions that improved harvest distribution across distant villages, and countless reminders centered entirely upon other people's happiness. Never once did Clara complain about loneliness. Never once did she describe the emotional distance inside their marriage. Even the earliest pages written after their wedding focused not upon disappointment, but upon simple hopes that Adrian would not exhaust himself beneath the weight of leading the kingdom. Near the final pages, Adrian found another quiet reflection written only a few weeks earlier. He carries responsibilities that few people truly understand. I hope tomorrow brings him one peaceful moment, even if I am never the reason for it. Adrian closed the journal slowly. For the first time since their marriage, the silence inside the room no longer felt peaceful. It felt painfully revealing. Outside the palace windows, the western gardens rested beneath silver moonlight where countless white roses gently moved with the evening breeze. Somewhere beyond those quiet flowers, Clara continued living exactly as she always had, asking nothing, expecting nothing, and giving everything. Sitting alone beneath the warm lantern light, Adrian realized that revenge had never truly protected his heart. It had only blinded him to the extraordinary woman who had quietly stood beside him all along. The following morning arrived beneath a blanket of silver mist that drifted gently through the western gardens, softening the outlines of every rose bush and ancient stone pathway. Adrian Carter had not slept. Long after the palace lanterns had faded into darkness, Clara Bennett's journals remained open across his desk, every page quietly dismantling the image he had carried in his heart for years. The revenge that had once felt justified now seemed strangely empty beside the countless examples of kindness she had offered without ever expecting anything in return. Before the first council bell sounded, Adrian left his chambers and walked alone toward the gardens. It was the first time since their marriage that he sought Clara instead of simply encountering her by chance. He found her kneeling beside a bed of white roses, carefully tying fragile stems to slender wooden supports so they would continue growing upright after the recent spring rain. Her woven basket rested nearby, already filled with fresh herbs and blooming flowers prepared for the palace physician. She looked up as his footsteps approached and greeted him with the same gentle smile she offered every morning. "Good morning, Your Majesty," she said softly. Adrian noticed there was no hesitation in her voice, no bitterness hidden behind polite words. She treated him with the same quiet grace she showed every person inside the palace. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of birds and the distant fountain filled the peaceful silence. Adrian finally broke it. "I read your journals." Clara's hands paused briefly above the roses before she slowly looked toward him. Surprise flickered across her face for only a heartbeat before her calm expression returned. "I never intended anyone to read them," she admitted gently. Adrian lowered his eyes. "I know." Another silence settled between them, heavier than the first. He searched for words that suddenly felt far more difficult than addressing an entire royal council. "I thought I understood who you were," he said quietly. "Now I realize I never truly tried." Clara carefully finished securing the final rose stem before standing beside him. The morning breeze lifted a few loose strands of her chestnut hair, while sunlight slowly began breaking through the mist. "Sometimes people only see the story they are prepared to believe," she answered without resentment. Adrian looked directly into her blue eyes for what felt like the first time. "I married you because I believed revenge would give me peace." Clara listened without interrupting. "Instead," Adrian continued, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, "I found someone who spent every day making my life easier while I remained too blind to notice." Clara offered a small, thoughtful smile that carried neither victory nor satisfaction. "Peace has never grown from revenge," she replied. "Only understanding can grow into peace." Her words settled quietly inside him. Adrian realized she was not trying to make him feel guilty. She simply spoke the truth as gently as she always had. Before returning to her work, Clara picked a single blooming white rose and placed it upon the edge of the stone fountain. "Flowers never bloom because someone orders them to," she said softly while watching sunlight touch the petals. "They bloom because someone chooses to care for them every day." Adrian understood the meaning immediately. A trust could not be restored through one apology or one conversation. It would require patience, consistency, and countless ordinary moments lived differently than before. As Clara continued tending the garden, Adrian did not walk away as he always had. Instead, he quietly picked up the second watering can resting beside the fountain. Without asking for permission or expecting recognition, he stepped beside her and began watering the next row of roses in complete silence. Clara glanced toward him with gentle surprise before returning her attention to the flowers, and for the first time since their marriage, the distance between them felt just a little smaller than it had the day before. The days that followed did not transform Mooncrest Citadel overnight, but those who lived within its ancient walls quietly began noticing changes too subtle to announce and too meaningful to ignore. Adrian Carter no longer hurried past the Western Gardens every morning. Instead, before the first council meeting, he walked there carrying a small basket of fresh watering tools or gardening gloves, joining Clara Bennett without ceremony or expectation. At first, palace servants exchanged surprised glances from distant pathways, believing the moment would pass as quickly as it had appeared. Yet each sunrise brought the same quiet scene. The Alpha King stood beside his Omega beneath blooming roses, carefully watering young plants, removing fallen branches, or simply listening while Clara explained which flowers needed more sunlight and which herbs would soon be ready for the palace physician. Adrian rarely spoke during those mornings. He spent most of the time observing the gentle patience with which Clara treated every living thing around her. She thanked the gardeners, remembered the names of new servants, smiled warmly at children delivering baskets from nearby villages, and greeted elderly workers with genuine affection. None of those gestures seemed rehearsed. They were simply part of who she had always been. One afternoon, while walking through the marketplace inside the palace grounds after a council meeting, Adrian noticed an elderly merchant struggling to carry several heavy wooden crates toward his small produce stall. Before the royal guards could step forward, Clara quietly crossed the square and lifted one side of the load herself. She laughed softly as the old merchant apologized for allowing his queen to help with ordinary work. Clara only smiled and answered, "Kindness does not become smaller simply because the task is." Adrian remained standing several steps away, watching the exchange without interrupting. The merchant never realized the Alpha King had witnessed everything. That evening, Adrian found himself thinking less about the words Clara had spoken and more about the way she had lived them without hesitation. Days later, another unexpected moment quietly settled inside his heart. A young servant accidentally spilled ink across several important council documents while preparing the meeting chamber. The frightened young man immediately lowered his head, expecting harsh disappointment. Before Adrian could speak, Clara calmly stepped forward with clean cloths, helping save as many pages as possible while gently reassuring the servant that honest mistakes deserved patience rather than fear. Adrian watched as the young servant's trembling hands slowly steadied beneath Clara's encouragement. Afterward, when the servant had quietly left the room, Adrian turned toward her. "You always seem to know the right thing to say," he admitted. Clara folded the stained cloth neatly before answering. "People remember how someone makes them feel long after they forget the mistake itself." Adrian remained silent, realizing that countless people throughout his kingdom probably remembered Clara for exactly that reason. As spring gradually deepened, another quiet habit formed without either of them discussing it. Whenever Adrian finished the final council meeting each evening, he found himself walking naturally toward the western gardens instead of returning directly to his private study. Clara was almost always there, tending roses beneath the fading sunlight. Sometimes they spoke about village harvests, books from the royal library, or the changing seasons. Other evenings they simply worked side by side while birds settled into the surrounding trees and the fountain echoed gently through the peaceful air. Neither conversation nor silence felt uncomfortable anymore. Captain Lucas Harper often observed them from the distant courtyard with a quiet smile, recognizing something that even Adrian himself had not yet fully understood. The Alpha King had begun searching for reasons to spend ordinary moments beside the woman he had once married only to satisfy revenge. Without dramatic promises, without grand declarations, and without realizing when it had first begun, his guarded heart had quietly started choosing Clara's presence over his own solitude, one peaceful day after another. The annual spring assembly arrived beneath a brilliant blue sky, drawing nobles, village elders, scholars, merchants, and palace servants into the magnificent Great Hall of Mooncrest Citadel. Sunlight streamed through towering stained glass windows, covering the polished marble floor with ribbons of gold, sapphire, and crimson light. Every royal banner hung proudly between the ancient stone columns while the bronze bells echoed across the kingdom, announcing the beginning of the gathering. Clara Bennet entered quietly, wearing the same elegant ivory dress and charcoal gray cloak she had always preferred. She expected nothing more than another formal ceremony before returning to the Western Gardens. Adrian Carter stood before the ancient throne wearing his black royal cloak embroidered with silver, yet something within his calm expression had changed. The distance that once surrounded him had quietly disappeared, replaced by a quiet certainty that only weeks earlier would have seemed impossible. As the assembly settled into complete silence, Adrian stepped away from the throne instead of remaining above everyone else. He slowly walked toward the center of the great hall where every citizen could clearly see him. The council expected announcements about trade agreements, harvest forecasts, and preparations for the coming summer. Instead, Adrian looked toward Clara with unmistakable sincerity before addressing the entire kingdom. "Today," he began, "I wish to speak not about the strength of our walls or the prosperity of our harvests, but about a kind of strength that too often remains invisible." The hall became perfectly still. Adrian continued with steady conviction. "There is someone among us who has quietly carried burdens that never belonged to her alone. She restored our gardens, strengthened our libraries, supported our physicians, comforted our servants, prepared aid for distant villages, and protected this kingdom through countless acts of kindness that asked for nothing in return." Every eye gradually turned toward Clara. She lowered her gaze, visibly surprised by becoming the center of attention. Adrian gently invited her to stand beside him. After a brief hesitation, she walked across the marble floor while whispers of recognition spread throughout the gathering. Many people suddenly remembered moments when Clara had helped them during difficult seasons without expecting gratitude. Adrian waited until she stood beside him before speaking once more. "I married Queen Clara believing revenge would bring peace to my heart," he admitted with complete honesty. A quiet wave of surprise passed through the hall, yet no one interrupted him. "Instead, I discovered that revenge only blinded me to the extraordinary woman standing beside me every single day. While I guarded my pride, she quietly cared for my kingdom, my people, and even for me." His voice softened as he looked toward Clara. "I cannot change the reasons that brought us together, but I can choose the reasons we continue walking forward from this day." The elderly gardener slowly began applauding. The palace physician followed. Soon the librarians, royal guards, village elders, merchants, servants, and every guest inside the great hall rose to their feet. Their applause filled the chamber not with celebration alone, but with heartfelt gratitude for the woman whose kindness had quietly shaped their lives for years. Clara looked around with gentle disbelief, her blue eyes shimmering beneath the warm sunlight. Adrian did not reach for her hand with dramatic gesture or grand display. Instead, he simply moved one step closer until they stood side by side before the entire kingdom. It was a simple movement, yet everyone understood its meaning. From that day forward, Adrian established a new royal tradition requiring every season's assembly to honor acts of quiet service performed throughout Mooncrest Kingdom, regardless of title or position. As the bronze bells rang once again across the ancient citadel and sunlight illuminated the blooming gardens beyond the palace windows, Clara realized that true recognition was never measured by applause alone. It was found in the moment someone finally chose to see the heart that had always been quietly giving everything. Summer arrived gently across Mooncrest Kingdom, and with it came a quiet transformation that no royal decree could ever have accomplished alone. The western gardens bloomed more brilliantly than anyone could remember, their white and crimson roses stretching toward the warm morning sunlight as though reflecting the peace that had finally settled within the palace itself. Adrian Carter no longer began his days inside the council chamber. Instead, he always visited the gardens first, where Clara Bennett was usually tending flowers, gathering herbs, or speaking with gardeners whose names he now knew because she had patiently introduced every one of them. What had once been silent distance between husband and wife had gradually become easy conversation. They discussed harvests, books, village festivals, children who dreamed of attending the Royal Academy, and elderly couples celebrating decades of marriage. They laughed together more often now, not because either of them tried to force happiness, but because comfort had quietly replaced uncertainty. Adrian discovered that the greatest joy of being king was no longer found inside the throne room. It was found beside the woman whose gentle heart had slowly taught him how to see the kingdom through compassion instead of pride. Together, they visited distant villages without unnecessary ceremony, listening to farmers describe successful harvests, watching children race across open fields, and thanking physicians, teachers, craftsmen, and volunteers whose daily work strengthened the kingdom far beyond what crowns alone could accomplish. Everywhere they traveled, people welcomed them not simply because they ruled wisely, but because they walked among ordinary families with genuine respect. Clara never sought attention during those visits. She continued speaking first with servants, gardeners, and elderly neighbors before greeting local officials. Adrian quietly followed her example until kindness itself became one of Mooncrest Kingdom's greatest traditions. Captain Lucas Harper often smiled as he watched the royal couple leave the palace together each morning. He remembered the lonely wedding day when two people had stood beside one another while carrying completely different hearts. Now they walked at the same pace, without either one needing to hurry ahead or struggle to catch up. The palace servants noticed the difference as well. Meals were shared together instead of separately. The royal study often remained open because Adrian preferred discussing important decisions with Clara before presenting them to the council. The Western Gardens became a gathering place where scholars, physicians, children, and elders freely exchanged ideas while Clara served fresh herbal tea and Adrian listened with genuine interest. One peaceful evening, as the sun slowly disappeared beyond the distant hills, the two of them stood beside the old stone fountain where white roses had first witnessed the beginning of change. Adrian gently looked toward Clara and said, "I once believed love was something that arrived all at once. You taught me that real love grows quietly through ordinary days, honest choices, and patient hearts." Clara smiled softly before answering, "Flowers bloom because someone keeps caring for them long after the first seed is planted." Adrian nodded, finally understanding every lesson she had lived long before he had been willing to learn it. They remained standing together beneath the golden evening sky while white doves crossed peacefully above the palace towers and the bronze bells echoed softly across the valley. No grand celebration marked that moment. None was needed. The greatest ending had never been the royal wedding, the public recognition, or even the heartfelt apology. The true ending was that two people who had once walked the same road for entirely different reasons now chose, every single day, to walk forward together with mutual respect, quiet gratitude, enduring friendship, and a love patiently built one ordinary act of kindness at a time.